So coming off at the end of the previous chapter, where we saw Kashimo bringing Panda to death's door, Hakari showed up at the last second, and it brings us to the beginning of this chapter where he's just straight up blasting him immediately into some shipping containers. Then he tries to do like this swinging drop kick type move to him, but Kashimo narrowly evades it. And then Hakari's like, do you feel a tingle? In reference to Kashimo's cursed energy trait, which he acknowledges is barely affecting Hakari. And then we get a little further breakdown of it where it says combining his cursed energy trait effect makes it difficult to defend with simple physical reinforcement through cursed energy. So even if you do block and use cursed energy along with it, you're still going to get shocked. However, in Hakari's case, his cursed energy output is high enough that he could just ignore it. And Kashimo also points out that there's mysterious music coming from him. And in the first couple pages here, we could see these musical notes coming out of Hakari. And this all goes back to his jackpot, because it says immediately after a jackpot, the private Pure Love Train theme song Admiring You plays for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. So at the end of chapter 183, we saw that Hakari did in fact get his jackpot after using his domain expansion Idle Death Gamble against Charles. And at the end, we kind of just saw him kick him in the face, and it just ended there. So we didn't know anything else that was going on, and I'm assuming that since we haven't seen Charles since then, he's been defeated, and that's why Hakari is here. But also, he's still riding off of that jackpot because this theme song is still playing. And also, if you're confused as to what is going on with Hakari's domain expansion and how it works, check out this video here. I think I explained it pretty good, or at least as best as I could at the time, without being like too superfluous and trying to make it unnecessarily confusing. Hey, also guys, if you like my Jujutsu Kaisen content, please subscribe. A lot of you consistently watch these videos, but you don't subscribe. So in case you just need to be reminded, here you go. Thanks. But anyway, they properly introduce themselves to each other, and Hakari realizes that like, oh, hey, this is Kashimo, that guy that we were talking about coming into this arc, and he was actually the guy that I was supposed to go after, because when they were looking at the chart of players, Kashimo and Higuruma were the two that had at least 100 points. And they figured that Kashimo was probably going to be the strongest, so Hakari took it upon himself to go after Kashimo. So it's coming full circle here. And then this leads to Hakari asking like, hey, you know, if I win, let me use your points. And Kashimo's like compliant about it. He's like, do as you like. You're with Panda, right? Tell me what you know about Sukuna if you live through this. And Hakari's like kind of bothered by it. And of course, this goes back to Kashimo's main motivation here, or at least the main motivation that we know about him. And it's that he's like super interested in Sukuna. I assume that he, you know, probably wants to fight him or something, or, you know, at the very least be his disciple, or it's up in the air, but we'll eventually find out. Then suddenly Hakari's like, oh yeah, here it comes. Cursed energy bonus. Then Hakari kind of stops fighting back and takes some shots from Kashimo. And Kashimo's confused by this. He's like, he's totally caving in. Don't disappoint. And then Hakari just levels Kashimo again. And then right after, he does like the Michael Jackson crotch grab move and then dips off and knees him in the stomach. Then they go into like this quick scuffle where Kashimo has Hakari's leg, and Hakari like tries to hammer fist him or something, but Kashimo narrowly evades it. And as he springs away, he's like, I've charged up enough. This is in reference to his cursed energy trait that we were introduced to 2 chapters ago when he was going against Panda initially, where essentially he can build up this electrical charge in him through his cursed energy manipulation. And when he strikes you, he can give you a positive charge, as we see him elbowing Hakari in the face here, and then that allows him to release the negative charge that was built up in him. And since the negative and the positive charges attract, he shoots like a lightning bolt at you. And this straight up blows off Hakari's arm here. And this is understandable because when he hit Panda's sister form with this, it like blew her up too. And Kashimo assumes that like it's pretty much over at this point, so he's going to pile on. But Hakari is like unfazed by this and just kicks Kashimo in the face. And then his arm just grows back immediately, Sukuna style. And then we get an explanation as to what's going on with Hakari's jackpot from Idle Death Gamble. And it says, resulting in a bonus of unlimited cursed energy throughout the round. Hakari never learned reverse curse technique. However, the unlimited cursed energy causes his body to reflexively perform reverse curse technique to prevent his body from breaking. In other words, Hakari is unkillable for 4 minutes and 11 seconds immediately after a jackpot. This is just amazing. I love this so much. Yes, it's kind of broken, but at the same time it's not, because he's getting like a time limit similar to what we saw with Akotu once his abilities were fully explained, or for the most part. I mean, yeah, sure, there is a luck factor in it, but Hakari is obviously a master of this, and there's so many luck boosters that make it more favorable for him to get the jackpot, on top of you just being inside of his domain and being susceptible to it. But like I said, this is just incredible because it's literally saying he's unkillable here. Like, I'm pretty sure even if like you blow off his head or just explode him, he'll just come back. I mean, I don't know how far it goes. I don't know if you like vaporize him, he'll come back. But so far it seems like if he's hitting this jackpot for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, you better just run. I mean, if you're Gojo or somebody on that level, I'm sure you could take care of him. Like if Gojo uses Infinite Void or something, then Hakari's abilities are irrelevant here. But you know, for 99% of the cast in this series, you're pretty much screwed if Hakari hits this on you. But we're coming to the end of the chapter here, where Kashimo points out that his music has ended and his cursed energy is starting to recede, which implies that the 4 minutes and 11 seconds are up. And it makes sense considering that he hit it going against Charles, and then he had to, you know, come over to save Panda and everything. But it doesn't matter because Hakari immediately goes back into his domain expansion. And then the ending exposition here says, during the round, his cursed energy and expended curse technique replenish. As long as Hakari keeps hitting the jackpot, he can open his domain over and over. So just when you thought Hakari was overpowered, it goes to the next level here. So just like a good gamer, I'll say, somebody who really understands how to manipulate and exploit a game, or in Hakari's case more so a gambler, he's treating it like clockwork here, because as soon as Kashimo realized that the music ended and his cursed energy rescinded, he went right back into the domain because he's going to gamble once again, which on paper he can do infinitely as long as he keeps hitting the jackpot. And like I said, the way that his domain expansion works with all of the multipliers and dynamics that allow him to keep activating the game, he's bound to get the jackpot, if you of course don't defeat him and just allow him to keep doing what he's doing. As we saw, Charles was overwhelmed by it, but I think it's going to be different here with Kashimo, since Kashimo is at Hakari's level, if not at a higher. It remains to be seen at this point. So I don't think Kashimo is going to be as susceptible to idle death gamble as Charles was. Also, another big thing that we have to remember is that Kashimo hasn't revealed his curse technique yet, and I think that's going to be the big reveal in the next chapter, the thing that is going to turn the tables on Hakari here. But even aside from that, what is Kashimo's domain expansion? Like, is Kashimo just immediately going to activate that and have it overtake Hakari's own domain? Because that's, you know, very likely at this point too. It's not going to be easy for Hakari at all. Like, this chapter was more so, I think, his big moment, but I think it's probably going to decline after this, and Kashimo is really going to show the crazy powerhouse that he is, because Hakari hasn't really had much adversity at this point, and I think at least the next 2 chapters are going to be that time for him. But I do think that Hakari will win this in the end. I don't think he's going to lose, and I definitely don't think he's going to die. I also don't think we've seen the end of Hakari's power-ups or his jackpots, because I'm sure he has another one besides just gaining infinite cursed energy. I mean, your guess is as good as mine as to what it could be, but I'm sure that'll be like another big triumphant reveal going into this fight. Welcome back to another episode of trying to figure out Hakari's abilities. So coming off of the previous chapter, we saw Hakari immediately activate his domain expansion again once his jackpot infinite cursed energy ran out. And that brings us to the beginning of the chapter here, where Kashimo is getting the exposition dump on how Hakari's domain expansion works, just like how Charles did previously. And it's saying that it's happening faster than he could give up on activating Hollow Wicker Basket. That's an odd way of phrasing that. Hollow Wicker Basket is like the old version of Simple Domain. We saw Riichi use it against Megumi, but the fact that Kashimo would even use Hollow Wicker Basket in order to defend himself against against Hakari's domain here makes me wonder if he even has his own domain expansion. The spoilers actually said that he did, but in this chapter, there's no confirmation for it. And considering what he does here before the flashback, maybe that's him activating it, but he doesn't say it, so maybe he doesn't. Or maybe he doesn't even want to use it. Remains to be seen. Okay, so let's get into breaking down this sequence. So immediately Hakari is essentially activating his patchy slot and doing like the slot machine roll thing here. And considering that the last time he hit his jackpot against Charles, he lined up 3 odd numbers because we saw that he hit 3 threes, he's immediately starting off with a chance booster here. And the one that he's getting, I'm pretty sure, is the Yumi background, where it says when advancing to a scenario, a tantalizing image of Yumi Asagiri appears. And I guess that's signified by the girls in the bathing suits here. And with that, he gets increased probability for the jackpot, or just getting better spins in general. But by doing that, he is now not in an unkillable state because he's in the increased probability mode, as it's indicated here in this chart. Kashimo is also aware of this. Like I said previously, Kashimo is going to be way more confident than Charles was coming into this, despite him being from like 400 years ago. But after this, they go into like a fighting sequence, and it winds up with Kashimo getting the better of Hakari here. But then suddenly Hakari breaks out of it and he says continuation, and then at the top right corner we see the ×2 marker. This is a visual effect indicator, and it's one of the consecutive effects. It's actually the second best one. Hey guys, also if you like my Jujutsu Kaisen content, please subscribe if you haven't already. It's fine if you don't want to, but if you needed a reminder, here you go. Thanks. So as we see here in this video of this guy playing the Tekken Patchy Slot machine, this is from the channel How to Play Pachinko and Patchy Slot. What I think is going on here, or at least what I think Gege is trying to represent, is that hand-to-hand sequence of Kashimo and Hakari is kind of playing out the way that this little action scene here plays out on the screen. And as the slots roll at the bottom, Hakari is essentially getting a ×2 on one of these columns, which is good because it generates a visual effect, and it also gives him more chance, as well as a consecutive effect, meaning he can do it again. And the benefit of generating these visual effects is because if he gets 1 or more, he can advance to a Riichi scenario. And Riichi basically means you go into this cutscene sequence that can lead to a potential jackpot. So he redoes the fight with Kashimo once again and still loses to him. But because it was consecutive, he could do the renewal here, and once he rolls again, he now gets a ×3, which is the best consecutive effect. So now that he's got a ×2 and a ×3, like I said before, he's generated 2 or more visual effects, and he can advance to a Riichi scenario, which is just going to a cutscene that may or may not lead to the jackpot, like we see here in this Tekken video. Coincidentally enough, in this Tekken video, the player also gets 2 6s, just like Hakari does here in the chapter. So now that he's advanced to this Riichi scenario, the cutscene begins. And this time, the cutscene that he's getting is the potty emergency Riichi, which is 2 out of 3 stars. So it's the second best, I guess, the best being Friday Night Final Train, which we saw him use against Charles. And as Hakari says, if the character reaches Shin Yuri Gawaka without an accident, the result is a jackpot Riichi scenario. So it's just like in this Tekken cutscene scenario here. If Jin is able to overcome Kazuya, then it's a success and he'll go to the jackpot, meaning the result gives him 3 6s. And in this video, the player gets 3 6s, just like Hakari winds up getting, because his cutscene scenario here winds up being successful, and the character here, Hiro Kato, winds up making it to the bathroom. So that's pretty much the equivalent of Jin beating Kazuya in this cutscene. And that causes Hakari to say, start the music, because as it was revealed in the previous chapter, the private Pure Love Train theme song plays when Hakari gets the jackpot. Now that he has it, he has unlimited cursed energy for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which essentially means that he is unkillable and has perpetual reverse curse technique. But apparently there's a little catch here, because Kashimo says since the jackpot was an even number, it was 666, even if he opens the domain again after the 4 minutes and 11 seconds is over, like he did at the end of the previous chapter, then his increased probability will have ended, which means of course that he won't get the jackpot as quickly again. And that brings us to the beginning of this chapter, where he's coming in with increased probability because he hit the jackpot against Charles with an odd number, which he had triple threes against him, so that gave him increased probability coming into the next domain expansion. But Kashimo figures, like any rational person would, that if he can survive for the next 4 minutes and 11 seconds, then he can defeat Hakari, because, you know, he won't be invincible at that point. Kashimo, he don't play like that. The crux of Kashimo's character is fighting a worthy opponent, getting that rush, getting pushed to his absolute limit. So he'd rather just fight Hakari at his most powerful with unlimited cursed energy and still be able to beat him at that point, because that brings us to where he's like, turn up the volume because this is a funeral for the living. But we're cutting away from that and we're going to a flashback. This is happening 400 years ago, I'm assuming, where we see Kenjaku, in a previous host that he was in at this point, coming up to Kashimo, and Kashimo already knows that it's Kenjaku, apparently, and Kenjaku's like, did you have fun? And we see that he had killed some dude, and Kashimo says, not at all, I should have fought you. Kenjaku's like, no, spare me, I'm not fit for fighting right now. So I assume that means that the host that he's in at this point isn't like powerful or anything. He was more so just in this to orchestrate more of his plan, which makes sense because he wasn't always like an ultra powerful ghetto body. I mean, at one point he was in the woman who was Yuji's mom, so I'm sure he wasn't too powerful at that point either. But why does Kashimo know Kenjaku at this point? Well, I'm assuming that Kenjaku has been in contact with Kashimo, kind of like a drug dealer, like feeding him what he wants, like giving him these strong opponents, like, hey, fight this guy, here, fight this guy, and he keeps coming back to him, you know, keep chasing that high, which is like Kenjaku's big plan here, because he ultimately wants to make this deal with Kashimo. But then Kenjaku says, but I heard about something intriguing in Michinoku. The greatest cursed energy output ever happened in Date province, a veritable cannon. So here's where we're seeing Ryu back in his original time, which was also 400 years ago. And we knew this because when Ryu was having like his final clash with Akotsu, it said something along the lines of a thirst that hadn't been quenched in over 400 years, which, you know, pretty much told us that Ryu was from 400 years ago. And we also knew that Kashimo was from 400 years ago too, because he said, oh man, the sorcerers were much stronger 400 years ago. And it made me wonder, like, well, if both of these guys kind of want the same thing, a worthy opponent, which they seemingly hadn't received, why didn't they just fight each other if they both came from the same time? And I also thought one of the explanations is, you know, the world's a big place. Maybe they were just too far away from each other, and apparently that's the case because Kashimo's like, Michinoku, that's far away. So that's Gege's explanation as to why these two ultra powerhouses who existed at the same time, who both wanted the same thing, didn't fight each other. But then Kashimo asks Kenjaku, like, who's the strongest sorcerer you know? And Kenjaku says, Sukuna. I'm sorry that it's from 600 years ago, but I'm not changing my mind. And this is like the hook that Kenjaku finally got into Kashimo to make him hear out what his big plan is here for, you know, what eventually happens with Kashimo becoming a cursed object and eventually, you know, being put into the culling game 400 years later. Because he's like, well, in that case, I'll entertain what you say. Then I could fight Sukuna. Also, this pretty much confirms our theory on what's going on with Kashimo that we've been talking about for these last couple weeks as to like what his main motivation in the culling game is. And yeah, it's pretty much because he was promised by Kenjaku that he would eventually get a chance to fight Sukuna. And I think this also kind of confirms that Sukuna being like an opponent in the culling game was always kind of his plan. I actually recently made a video about this. You can check it out right here, or I'll just have it as a card at the end of the video. But yeah, Reggie talks about a bomb going off in the culling game eventually, and this also lines up with Kenjaku saying that Yuji and Sukuna are a bomb. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that like once only the strongest players of the culling game are left, Sukuna will be unleashed, probably when he chants in chain, and then whatever that sequence leads to him becoming his own autonomous being. It's gonna be everyone versus Sukuna, forced to evolve, and it's like a Heian era all over again, or the new Heian era. And then Kashimo turns around and we see that he's old, which is interesting, right? Because the Kashimo that we know currently is not old. And it makes me wonder, like, so why is he young now? Is it because when the cursed object version of the person gets reincarnated, they go back to their prime? Or is it solely dependent on the vessel? Like, if it's a young vessel, then do they become young as well? It's not really made too clear because we don't really know all of the variables yet. I mean, Ryu seems to be the same age that he was, more or less, but Dhruv is still kind of old when we saw him. But he's like a special case, I guess, because he says he's a veteran in his second incarnation. And it's never really made clear exactly what that means. Or maybe it just comes down to how they want to appear or whatever specific deal they make with Kenjaku. Kashimo's also coughing up blood in this sequence, so this might play into a possible ailment that he had that may have been healed by Kenjaku, or him reverting to his prime maybe mitigates him having this illness. It's possible that this might come up again against Hakari later on, maybe. Maybe it'll be revealed in the next chapter. Alright, so we got ourselves a chapter here today. Not really heavy on the exposition, but heavy on the battle sequences, which is nice. I'm not saying every chapter has to be like that, but I don't really want to have to put on my Togashi hat every single time I'm going to read one of these chapters. But on the first page here, we're getting the lyrics to Admiring You, which is the theme song for Private Pure Love Train. This is like the song that plays when Hakari hits his jackpot. And maybe the lyrics are giving us some insight into how this is going to play out in the end. I really don't care that much because these lyrics are like so Japanese that I can't really get into it. But speaking of the jackpot, Hakari got that in the previous chapter when he hit 666s against Kashimo. And that gave him the infinite cursed energy boost that we've come to love from Hakari. And that brings us to this chapter where he's still riding off of the jackpot. And the opening sequence here is like them running around the shipping yard and eventually punching one of these shipping crates at each other, like it's like ping pong or something. And as Hakari is like finally going to completely punch through it in an attempt to hit Kashimo, Kashimo jumps over him and hits him in the face with one of the doors, taking off his skin completely. Now normally this would be a pretty big deal, but you know, since Hakari is riding off with the jackpot, he has perpetual reverse curse technique, which means he'll just instantly regenerate from this. But during this sequence, Kashimo says that cursed energy comes from the gut, but you have to use your head to direct reverse curse technique. And that's pretty interesting because we heard someone else say that before, and it was our boy Toto, who we haven't seen in a while. Back when he was originally fight coaching Yuji, I think in chapter 37, Toto says that most sorcerers have to consciously make cursed energy flow. Like when you feel anger in your belly or a bad gut feeling, cursed energy nurtured on negativity is said to start from the belly and flow throughout the body, starting from the belly through the chest, the shoulders, arms, and to the fists. That is how cursed energy flows. But then going further, he says the flow of energy for an elite sorcerer is difficult to read. Do we think with our stomach? Do we use our minds to express rage? We exist in this world with our entire body, mind, and soul. So this could be coming full circle with Kashimo bringing this up here. Hey guys, also if you like my Jujutsu Kaisen content, please subscribe if you haven't already. It's fine if you don't want to, but if you just need a reminder, here you go. Thanks. But then after that, Kashimo says no matter how powerful his reverse curse technique is, if I crush his head with a single blow, he'll die. So I'll use my lightning to target his head and split it open. Now that's interesting as well. And I brought this up back when we originally got the explanation on how Hakari's infinite cursed energy worked. And it said that Hakari is unkillable for 4 minutes and 11 seconds immediately after a jackpot. And that made me think, like, is he literally unkillable? Like, if you blow off his head, will it come back? And I guess Kashimo is confirming here that that is not the case, or is this like just conjecture from him? Because if Hakari can die while in a jackpot from his head being taken off, then that directly conflicts with him being unkillable. But regardless, this, you know, raises the stakes for Hakari because they were essentially non-existent if he was literally unkillable while he's in his jackpot. Because in the previous chapter, after Hakari activated his jackpot, Kashimo was like, you may be unkillable, but I'll kill you anyway. And I was thinking like, okay, so how's he gonna do that? And then immediately following this, Kashimo shoots one of his lightning bolts at Hakari's head. And as it hits Hakari, it seems like even his curse technique here is acknowledging that he's going to die. But then before his head explodes, he expels the lightning / cursed energy out of his nose, and at the same time his reverse curse technique is like healing whatever kind of damage he took from that. And Hakari says, I almost died there, Kashimo. So yeah, I guess that settles it. And then it says the time remaining in the round, 8 seconds. So that's a little strange. That was a really fast 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I mean, granted, not all of the time is accounted for, especially because in the previous chapter, after Hakari hit the jackpot, went into that flashback sequence to end the chapter. So I guess the flashback time time and us coming into the whole race around the shipping containers accounts for like 4 minutes and 3 seconds. And it's understandable. You know, Gege kind of needs to get to the point in this chapter. We don't need this 4 minutes and 11 seconds to be as long as they would be in like Hunter x Hunter or One Piece. But after Hakari successfully survives that lightning to the head, he starts attacking Kashimo again, and he says there must be a trick to that attack, which means Kashimo can't use it again right away. So I'll go hard and heavy. I'm unkillable, so I can cut loose. Really need a new way to describe that. Maybe say like I'm nearly unkillable or something. But then Kashimo says, as for accumulating electrical charge, you're not the only one, Hakari. Then we see his staff on the other side of the shipping yard, which I don't think he's used so far, and it's possibly for this purpose. It turns out that he can transfer a positive charge to the staff, just like he would to a person, because that's the original explanation that we got on how Kashimo's ability is working, with him rendering the lightning bolt. When it said that Kashimo separates his cursed energy charges like electricity. When striking an opponent, a positive charge is transferred, and the negative charge in Kashimo is discharged to the target without losing any electricity towards the ground. This results in lightning that rends the air and can't miss. So now that the staff has been loaded up like Hakari was previously, now Kashimo can activate the lightning strike but on the staff. But in this moment, Hakari is in the path of Kashimo and the staff, so the lightning bolt travels through Hakari's abdomen and takes a huge chunk out of it. And it was right at the moment that Hakari's round ended, meaning the jackpot was over and he no longer has infinite cursed energy along with perpetual reverse curse technique. And then Kashimo looks through the gaping wound and says it's over, but then immediately Hakari activates his domain expansion. And that's where the chapter ends. So this is awesome. I was talking about this in the spoilers earlier this week, about how there's only like a few realistic ways that Hakari could get out of this situation, aside from being saved or just on the fly learning reverse curse technique, which it was stated that he cannot perform without the jackpot. He'd have to go immediately into his domain expansion again and hope to get the jackpot so that he can heal himself. And it turns out that he's doing that. And very fitting for the name of the domain expansion, Idle Death Gamble, because that's quite literally what is happening here. So like, what is going to happen after this? Is Hakari going to hit the jackpot immediately? Well, without some good old-fashioned luck, it's unlikely, I'll say, because it was explicitly pointed out in the previous chapter that because Hakari hit his last jackpot with even numbers, triple sixes, that means he won't open up his next domain expansion with increased probability like he did coming into the previous chapter, because when he hit his initial jackpot against Charles, it was triple threes, which were odd, and that gave him increased probability into his domain expansion against Kashimo. But now he doesn't have that, so his back's really against the wall here, and I'm assuming there's going to be some crazy trickery going on that allows Hakari to survive this fight, possibly. Now, like I said, there's still the other options out there of Hakari just learning reverse curse technique on the fly. Maybe he could be like, well, you know, I've done it so many times subconsciously through my jackpot ability that I just figured out how to do it now. Or someone comes to save him, such as a Kotsu, or maybe this is when Maki shows up, or he hits the jackpot again, but maybe it's a different jackpot ability this time. Instead of the infinite cursed energy, it's some other crazy effect that heals him or saves his life here or something like that. Or Kari dies. I hope not. That would really suck, but can't hold it against Gege. He has killed off other likable characters before when we kind of least expected it, I guess. So coming off of the previous chapter, Hakari's jackpot had ended, and once it did, Kashimo casted a lightning bolt from his stationary staff and had it run across the shipping yard all the way back to himself, but Hakari was right in its path, and this blew out like a portion of his stomach. And this seemingly was the end for Hakari, but since his jackpot was over, he was able to activate his domain expansion again. And that brings us to the beginning of this chapter, where Kashimo says he's making a desperate attempt to cast domain expansion, but all he'll get are faster spins, not increased probability. This is because the last jackpot that Hakari hit was an even number, triple sixes, so that means that he's going to go into faster spins mode, because he can only get increased probability by hitting an odd number jackpot. So instead of that, he just gets faster spins here, which just allow him to go through the game much faster than he normally would. So it's kind of compensating for the lack of increased probability that he would be getting otherwise, but it doesn't matter because he's instantly hitting the jackpot here. And the explanation is because it's an unexpected jackpot due to hidden probability. It's a pachinko mode that appears similar to faster spins but actually carries increased probability. A player can tell by looking at the segment display. So this is like a little bit of a cop-out from Gege, to be honest. I mean, the stakes were so high at the end of the chapter, especially coming into this one, and it's kind of just like, nah, it doesn't matter. He just hit the jackpot because I need him to survive this sequence. Especially because Gege established such an elaborate rule system for how Hakari's abilities work here. And it's kind of just like, nah, forget it. He just hit it instantly because hidden probability. I guess this could be similar to like when Pachyslot players are able to manually hit the jackpot themselves, like by seeing when the symbols are going to come and they just hit them in sequential order. But maybe it's less of that and more just blind luck here, because it says, you know, Hakari has truly incredible luck. So it's whatever. Hidden probability is like an ambiguous thing to a novice Pachyslot player, to myself anyway, but it ultimately just doesn't matter. Gege needed a way for Hakari to survive here so that the fight can continue, and that's what we're getting. So Hakari once again has infinite cursed energy here, and he's regenerating from his fatal wound. Hey, also guys, if you like my Jujutsu Kaisen content, please subscribe if you haven't already. It's fine if you don't want to, but if you just need a reminder, here you go. And then he says, thanks to a manga otaku, I've got manga brain now. He's referring to his previous opponent in Charles, and he asks Kashimo like if he likes manga, and Kashimo says no. And this is like interesting because like, does Kashimo even know what manga is? It's from 400 years ago. Then Hakari opens up his domain barrier and it releases Kashimo over the sea. He says, did he shift his barrier coordinates? So what I'm assuming is happening here is Hakari somehow physically moved his domain barrier from their original location on the shipping yard and moved it to like over the sea. Because usually when a sorcerer casts their domain expansion and it's not incomplete, it's usually represented as like a giant sphere. So I guess more advanced sorcerers can like literally move the location of the sphere itself so that when the domain expansion is over, they could be released to a different location, but with their opponent being none the wiser, which is what's happening here. And this is obviously smart because of the electrical properties of Kashimo's cursed energy, because he says, so once it starts discharging in water, it won't stop until it's depleted. I can release my cursed energy until it's gone, or I can shut it off until I return to land. But conveniently for, I guess, both of them, the sea is infested with cursed spirits. And this is of course because of the end of the Shibuya arc when Kenjaku released, you know, all of those cursed spirits into Japan. It makes sense that, you know, the waters would be infested with them as well. I mean, why not? And as soon as they're about to fall into the water, they just come out like hungry sharks or something. And this gives a platform for Kashimo to step on, you know, to avoid being submerged. And as Hakari comes down, he just starts crushing them. And he's able to like grab onto like a flying fish cursed spirit so that he can stay elevated, and he kicks Kashimo like into the water. And as he does this, Kashimo gets submerged and starts discharging. And he says, I can't withstand his kicks without cursed energy. My cursed energy is flowing out. I have to suppress it. So this is because Kashimo needed to reinforce himself with cursed energy to not get completely destroyed by Hakari's kick. But at the same time, he got kicked into the water while he was still reinforcing himself, meaning his cursed energy was still active, so once he's submerged, he starts discharging. But then Hakari starts to get like woozy. He says, my breath, my eyes, and that smell, it can't be. And then he falls into the water. And it turns out that this was actually helping Kashimo, because Kashimo discharging under the water is causing electrolysis. And since it's salt water, this produces chlorine gas. And it says that chlorine was discovered in 1774. So the time isn't exactly lining up there, but Kashimo did have these abilities for, you know, many years. Because, you know, when we saw the flashback of him and Kenjaku, he was old when he made the deal. So we could just assume that he figured this out naturally. Kashimo was the first person to discover that electrocuting salt water produced chlorine gas. But then he says you can kill a user of reverse curse technique by destroying the brain in one blow or with toxins. And then we see a flashback of Urarame and Kenjaku from chapter 136. And this is because Choso hit Urarame with piercing blood, and Urarame was was able to use reverse curse technique and regenerate from the wound, but since Chozo had mixed poison with it, Urarame was still being affected by it, despite, healing the initial wound. And going further, Kashimo says, unlike simple body regeneration, addressing a toxin requires locating and removing the substance as well as a higher level of reverse curse technique. Apparently, he can't detoxify fast enough. And it seems like Hakari is pretty much done at this point, but no, he wakes up and hits Kashimo in the face, and Kashimo figures that, I guess despite his reverse curse technique being fully automatic, he targeted the toxin unconsciously and removed it. And considering that the explanation doesn't go any further here, I guess this is what happened. And Hakari is just even more beastly than we thought he was. Then Hakari realizes that he only has about 5 seconds left of his jackpot, and he figures that maybe he should wait until he gets above water to cast his domain again to avoid the risk of electrical shock and scalding water. But then he's like, nah, I'll just attack. And then he just starts beating down Kashimo while they're still both underwater. And he tells Kashimo to come on, and Kashimo's like, all right. And then he grabs Hakari's arm, and Hakari's shocked by this, and then suddenly there's a massive explosion underwater. And that's where the chapter ends. So your guess is as good as mine as to what's happening here. It's possible that Kashimo may have used his maximum technique, maybe. Now, it's also possible that he might not straight out say that it's his maximum technique. Kashimo doesn't really call his moves out like, a traditional character would. He kind of just does things, which I like. Maybe what he does here is a massive full discharge. All of his electrical curse energy is just discharged in one massive outburst, and this just causes a massive underwater explosion to where he's just trying to take out Hakari in one blow. I mean, this would be, his best bet, because he saw that when he gave Hakari a fatal wound, he just activated his domain expansion again and instantly hit the jackpot. So instead of just continuing to risk it, I suppose, just take him out in one shot. But it's also possible that, he runs the risk of taking himself out in the process. Now, does this mean that Hakari has lost? Maybe, but man, I don't think so. I'm really hoping that they both come out of this okay, this winds up being a draw as a result of whatever he's done, because I'd really like to see Kashimo and Hakari just continue on into this arc and make it to the final round of the culling game, where I suspect everyone is going to face off against Sukuna. So coming off at the end of the previous chapter, we saw Hakari and Kashimo kind of going into the final sequence of their battle, and it wound up with Kashimo creating this massive explosion. We're seeing the end result of it here, with Kashimo coming out of the water first, and he says, I'm out of cursed energy, but now and then Hakari comes out and just knocks him. We also see that Hakari is missing his left arm. And it turns out that Kashimo had suddenly released the cursed energy, whose outflow he'd been suppressing because of the electrical trait of it, because if he didn't, then it would just discharge in the water. But going further, it says before the electricity could travel through the seawater, it turned into thermal energy, resulting in an explosion of steam. So that's the big massive explosion that we saw. But then Kashimo wonders why Hakari wasn't completely destroyed by it. And Hakari's well, you didn't want me to use my domain again. And that if somehow he were to survive this big, final gambit by Kashimo, then he'd at least try to take off his arm. And that's why we saw Kashimo grab his left arm in the previous chapter. Because if he did, then he wouldn't be able to make the hand signs, which apparently is a condition to activate the domain. So Hakari sacrificed his left arm to assure that he would survive. And he did this by making a binding vow at the last second, by diverting the cursed energy that was surrounding his left arm to the rest of his body, so that way it would be reinforced so that he would be able to survive the brunt of the explosion, but at the cost of his left arm, because it wasn't reinforced by cursed energy anymore. Then Kashimo, realizing that he's defeated because he just expelled all of his cursed energy, it's basically go ahead, kill me. And Hakari's nah, then your 100 points would disappear. They need that because, we're going to be talking about the rule changes that they need to make later on. But also Hakari's I don't consider this a win because you never used your curse technique. And then Kashimo says, I can only use my curse technique once, and I want to use it on Sukuna. Hey, also guys, if you like my Jujutsu Kaisen content, please subscribe if you haven't already. It's fine if you don't want to, but if you just need a reminder, here you go. Thanks. So that's super interesting because, these last couple weeks following this battle, we've been wondering, or at least I have, has Kashimo used this curse technique? Because at first I was under the assumption that he hasn't used it yet because it was never stated that he did. It was always talking about the electrical trait of his cursed energy, but never him using his curse technique. And then some of you were telling me no, dummy, he has been using his curse technique. Especially because in chapter 186, he straight up says, combining my trait and curse technique effect makes it difficult to defend with simple physical reinforcement through cursed energy. Now, either that was a translation mistake by Viz or a mistake on Gege's end, but either way, I don't really care. I'm not really that pedantic about things. I'm actually just glad that we haven't seen Kashimo's curse technique yet, because, you know, it gives more intrigue to the character and gives us something to look forward to, because I do think for sure he's going to fight Sukuna eventually. I mean, I think it's going to whittle down to everyone who's left in the culling game fighting against him together. So at that point, we're going to see what Kashimo's curse technique is. And him saying that he can only use it once makes me wonder, like, so is that like once ever or just like once a day? I hope it's kind of just once a day, because that would kind of be tragic if he can only use it like once. But then we see Panda, who has reverted to a child form, and this is because he was utterly decimated in his fight against Kashimo, like on the brink of death for sure, but I guess he was just able to regenerate back from that. And I don't know if we're going to see like normal Panda again in this arc. I'm not sure how fast his regeneration is, but Hakari talking to Kashimo is like, let's make a deal. And Kashimo's like, but not for free. So I'm assuming this deal is like, hey, you know, let's call this ceasefire. You can kind of be like my pseudo friend, but also I'm going to need you to use your points for me to make a rule change that I'm going to need eventually. And in exchange, I guarantee that you'll be able to fight Sukuna. And Hakari can make that deal because he knows that Yuji is Sukuna, so he can at least guarantee that he can get Kashimo in the realm of fighting him. Obviously, he can't like automatically summon Sukuna, but he can get him to where he is. And then Hakari's like, anyway, I got some place to go. And then we hear the Kogani saying, a player has added a rule to the culling game. Rule 10. Players may transfer a number of points of their choosing to another player. So that's really interesting, because I guess this is giving us insight into the timeline of things, because Rule 10 was made in chapter 167 by Higuruma himself after his fight with Yuji was over. So I guess this means that all of this stuff with Hakari and Kashimo and all that has been happening congruently with Yuji and Higuruma's fight. But then we see Hakari coming back to Charles, that weird mangaka guy that he originally fought. And this is showing us that he didn't kill Charles, which, yeah, I guess we assumed he didn't. And, you know, they have like this little buddy talk. So I guess this is like Charles's full face turn here, and he's going to be a part of Hakari's group, Panda and Kashimo, going forward. But also, I guess Momo's going to be a part of that group, because she's showing up here too, and we haven't seen her since I think chapter 152, after Maki had massacred the Zen clan. And she's like, let's just cut to the chase. Did you get the points? And he's like, basically, yeah. And I guess that means because, like, you know, Kashimo has the points, and we made an agreement, and, you know, he'll make the rule change for us. And she says the plan calls for 4 new rules. First one is the points transfer, which has already been done. The second is allow the use of 100 points to create a substitute so individuals can withdraw from the culling game. And then we see Sumiki here, which is, you know, the whole purpose for this rule being made in the first place, to get her out, because she was put into the culling game against her will by Kenjaku. And then the third rule is remove the communication blocks on the colonies so that, you know, they can call each other and talk, which they haven't done for a very long time, at least in our real time. And then the fourth one is allow going in and out of barriers. And then she says, but I want to postpone the third one, establishing communication between colonies. Maki can pass through the barriers. So this is awesome, totally understandable as well, because she doesn't have any cursed energy, so she's not bound by that. We also saw Toji do this. That's how he was able to get into Jujutsu High, like bypassing Tengen's barriers. And she also says cooperation with Mei's younger brother should solve the third rule. So that's interesting. I guess we're going to have to wait for more information to be revealed on this, because we don't fully understand Yui Yui's curse technique yet, which I guess she's referring to here. It's implied to be some kind of like teleportation, because in chapter 133 we see Mei Mei and Yui Yui like suddenly appear in like Malaysia coming from Tokyo. And when Mei Mei's on the phone in that chapter, she's like, yeah, Lumpur, Yui Yui's curse technique. So I guess he can act as like some kind of intermediary for communication while he's on the outside of the barriers, possibly. I don't know, we'll see what happens with that. And then Hakari asks, why can Maki pass through the barriers? And Momo's like, because she turned into a monster.